Hello guys, and welcome to another Hymo Mythic guide. Today we're going to be talking about Butcher, and as always I have Joshua with me.
Hello everyone again.
So Butcher is one of the optional bosses which you can skip, and theoretically on LFR he's supposed to be the second boss, but actually in Mythic he's a really tough boss to kill. So generally guilds go for him as one of the last three bosses. Some guilds choose to go to Korag first, some guilds choose to go to the Butcher first. And it's basically a fight where it's all about the DPS, beating the end raids, and just out healing the damage. It's a very straightforward fight, just your general single target patchwork kinda like fight.
Because the Butcher is all about the DPS and the gear that you have in the raid, this fight will be done with 4 healers and 2 tanks, and the rest will just be DPS.
Yeah, generally you want to go with 4 healers to make it safer, but it is actually possible to kill this boss with 3 healers, although you will need 2 Holy Paladins probably. It's all about if you can beat the end raids. If you can beat it and you can go to 4 healers, do it. If not, cut down to 3 healers. So the boss tactic that is most commonly used nowadays is not really something that you would think of initially. You don't actually tank the boss anywhere close to the middle of the room. What you want to do is drag him over to the pond pool of water that there is to make the fight way easier than it should be normally.
That is why this tactic is also called the pool party on several forums, and we'll call it that as well.
So to start off this pool party tactic, what you want to first do is start the fight by pulling the boss all the way close to the pond, to the pool, whatever you want to call it, but stop right there as soon as he dipped his feet in the water, I guess, to make sure that you don't waste any damages by moving the boss too much from the beginning. And you keep him there until the first time he will charge. After the first bounding cleave, which is the charge and the knockback, you want to move him to his final position, which is all the way to the corner in that pool place, and keep him there for the rest of the fight.
With the pool party tactic, you get rid of one of the main mechanics in Mythic for the Butcher, which are the cadavers. They're going to be pale orcs running towards the boss, and when they reach the boss they'll blow up and deal damage and leave a pool on the ground that if you stand in you'll take damage and increase damage from his cleave. So you don't want to stand inside of that. You can also soak these by intercepting them before they reach the boss, which is what we're going to do at the start of the fight. As we position the boss right in the water at the start, they might be getting close to the boss, and since the raid is standing right behind him, they will get hit by it if you do not have 1 or 2 ranged people intercepting the pale orcs at that point. After the first jump and charge, we position the boss in a way so that they'll always hit the boss and you don't have to think about them anymore, except the groups behind and in front of the boss. Because you have to make sure that you do not get hit by the AoE blow up once they reach the boss.
Yeah, they have an explosion range, which is not that big, but you still need to watch out for it. And as the fight progresses, they will start spawning in an increased rate. Every time the boss is doing a bounding cleave, it increases the spawn rate by 1. So at the start of the fight, it's pretty easy because they come one at a time, and you can easily have 1 or 2 ranged people intercepting them and exploding them away from the raid. But as the fight progresses, they will start coming 2 at a time, 3 at a time, 4 at a time, and that is why this pool party tactic is so good, because you can basically completely ignore all of that mechanic and let them explode on the boss.
The second and last difference from Heroic is that the cleave will kill people when it reaches 4 stacks instead of 5. It works the same way as in Heroic, which means that you have the biggest clump around the Butcher. They're going to take a stack of cleave and take the damage from it, split among them. So you're going to want to rotate 2 groups again. 1 group will be behind the boss later in the fight, and 1 group will be next to the boss. You can see our positioning in this video really well. At the start it doesn't really matter as long as they're not on top of each other. So you just have one on the right leg and the other on the left leg, for example.
Yeah, it's super important to make sure that the cleave stacks go on the proper melee group. So make sure that you always have good control over that. An easy way to shift the cleaves from group 1 to group 2 is by having 2 healers, 1 in each group, that stand outside of the melee range. And whenever you want the left group or the right group to start getting the stacks, the appropriate healer moves into that group, increasing their number by 1, so they will get the cleave. Now, you still need to keep in mind that since the cleave AoE range is actually not very small, there is a chance, if you mess it up, to actually get the cleave stack on everyone, which is absolutely catastrophic. So you need to make sure that the 2 groups are actually far away from each other to not link it between themselves.
This is why we have one group go behind the boss instead of one of the legs after he jumped to the back of the pool party, because of the cadavers hitting the boss. If you should stand too far on the side of the cadavers, you would get hit by those. So one group goes behind the boss and the second group will just go on his side. If you can, you put all range DPS in that group, because melees might get parries from the boss if they're standing there.
When the boss reaches 100 energy, he still does the bounding cleave just like Heroic, so he will knock everyone back and charge at the biggest clump of ranged players in the raid. Now, a nifty way to avoid all of that damage, because you want your healers to focus healing the melees and the tanks the whole fight, is to have a mage and another mage or warlock, or it doesn't really matter, and they are the two people that stand on top of each other. Everyone else that is not in the melee camps stands by themselves. What this means is that those two players, the mage and the warlock or the two mages, they are gonna be the biggest clump of ranged DPS just by being two people. And that will mean that the boss will always charge on top of them. You can abuse that by having one of your mages blink away or the warlock use his teleport as soon as the boss starts charging, so he will avoid the damage, and the single mage that remains and gets the whole amount of the cleave damage, he can ice block it, he can get the hand of protection, and basically negate the whole damage from that cleave.
The first time we make him do the bounding cleave, the mage or warlocks have to make sure that they position themselves on the spot where we're going to move the boss. So he charges there and there's no need to move the boss afterwards. The second time and everything after that, they can position themselves somewhere right behind the boss preferably, so he moves in a straight line back and forth after he jumps. Now, as far as tanking goes for the Butcher, it stays the same as in Heroic. You're still going to take the Cleaver stacks, which is the dot that he applies on the main tank target, and the Tenderizer stacks, which will also be on the main tank target. The Tenderizer stacks will mean when you have to swap the tanks. So you want to swap in this fight around 2 stacks, and at the end of the fight, during Frenzy, you want to swap at 1 stack most of the time, because it has already dropped off on the other tank.
Now, as Just Wait mentioned, the boss still goes into Frenzy mode at 30%. And that means that he is gaining energy faster, he does more damage, and he casts his abilities more times. The biggest thing to look out for during this phase are the cleave stacks, because normally from 100% till 30%, you can have your groups go up to 2 stacks before you switch the group who is taking the next cleave. But during the Frenzy mode, you actually have to go up to 3 stacks, because otherwise the other group will not have dropped off their debuffs if you want to swap at 2 stacks. So you need to go up to 3 stacks, which means more damage, and if you mess it up and you get a stack when you shouldn't have, it basically means you're gonna die because you're going up to 3, and if you have an extra one, you're gonna reach 4 and insta-die.
Yeah, for the tanks, you're gonna want to call off turn cooldowns during the Frenzy phase. You want to have your Hand of Sacrifices, Depressions, and Vigilances ready to be used, because the damage is going to be really tough there.
And that basically sums up the whole fight. As you can see, it's not really a very complicated fight. It's just, can you kill the boss before it kills you, kind of thing. Just quickly noting some things that you need to keep in mind in this fight. First of all, you need to keep track of the cleave stacks. Not mess that up, because suddenly a whole group of your raid is gonna die. Second of all, look out for those cadaver explosions. Make sure if you're the group that is close to the explosions that you don't actually stand too close to them and take damage from it. So make sure you're attacking the boss from max melee range. And third of all, make sure that when the boss is doing the bounding cleave, that the ranged are properly spread so that the 2 people who are actually dealing with the charge and the cleave damage can actually be the biggest clump of ranged DPS. So the boss doesn't charge randomly and kills 2 other people in the raid.
Debuffs that you have to track on this fight will be for the tanks, which is the Tenderizer. It's important to know when it drops off, so you can taunt the boss again and take the boss damage instead of the other tank. Another debuff that's only going to be interesting for those that are moving in and out, or the healers, is Gushing Wounds. You're going to want to make sure that you know the amount of stacks that each group has taken when they're soaking the cleave.
Now, a few last tips and tricks for this boss are the following. First of all, as soon as the boss fight starts, and every time that there are bounding cleaves, those are good times to use Aspect of the Fox, so that your casters maximizing their DPS throughout the whole fight, because as we said, this is a hard to beat and raids fight. Also, after the boss does the first bounding cleave and he's charging to the final location that he's going to be tanked, it is also a good idea to use Stampeding Roar so that all of the raid is moving as fast as possible to their last location and continue DPSing the boss. Second thing is that the healers who are going in the groups to make them get the cleave, they need to keep track of the boss's HP and make sure that they know when the boss is going to hit the frenzy at 30% and start doing 3 stacks instead of 2 before he actually reaches that percent. So around 35%, you should call it out and start going up to 3 stacks so that you're playing it safe and you're not going to refresh the stacks by mistake.
2 more tips that involve tanks are that as he's doing the first cleave, you want to have the tanks positioned on the new position so they can taunt it and the boss won't move. But if you have both tanks move there, then he might target them for the bounding cleave. So you only want to have 1 tank move there and the second tank will follow after the boss's jump. And the last hidden tip is that once the boss is jumping for bounding cleave in the back of the room, every time he jumps, you adjust a little bit to the right in case there were any weird cadavers hitting the boss during the cleave or from a weird angle. So we give the group behind the boss a little more space to stand there.
And that is all you need to know for the Butcher Mythic fight. Keep in mind that you always want to maximize your DPS, but make sure that you're not leeching DPS on the cadavers. So keep track of that damage meter and the damage taken on those ads and call out the guys who are trying to cheese the DPS.
Thanks for watching, and if you have any improvements for us, let us know in the comments below.